Hello there, my name's Card. I'm a long-time progressive community organiser. Today, I'd like to talk about a particular trend we've really seen grown quite significantly in size and presence over the past few years. That is, pseudo-supernatural online communities, and how, within many of them, there is a tendency, largely but not exclusively among young adult women, to embrace the look and language of a sort of modern witchcraft, one often explicitly tinged with the politics of third-wave feminism. I'm not trying to voice a criticism of this subculture either. Far from it, I enjoy seeing it. And what I find particularly interesting about this sort of decentralized online community is how many of its members, many being self-styled witches, have embraced a type of performative and quite literally ritualistic magic as a means of self-confidence building and social bonding. I love many aspects of this whole idea, because while obviously there's no literal supernatural element to the act, what a lot of the people involved seem to be doing nevertheless seems to broadly work as a means to both entertain and support those participating, as well as create a progressive space for inclusive cultural discourse. Let's look at one way how this sort of dynamic might play out on a forum dedicated to this kind of witchcraft discussion. Let's say a young woman who uses any given neo-magic website is hoping for a remedy to regain their personal confidence following an incident such as a termination from work, or an unpleasant falling out with a friend, for example. If they were particularly into the whole performative side of these online communities, they might begin to ask around the site for any sort of spell or ritual they could perform in order to soothe their anxieties related to the bad thing that happened, and in doing so, excise the hesitation in their mind about going on with their lives in the wake of this event, if it was particularly disruptive to their present lives. Their online community is more than likely to offer myriad suggestions that may on the face of it admittedly all sound like woo peddling. You'd most certainly get more than a few other self-described witches recommend all sorts of practices, like lighting candles, meditating, drawing sigils, chanting, singing, preparing a hearty meal, or just exploring one's nearest natural environment. Any and all of these practices can be dressed up with an excessive amount of the pervasive online modern witch aesthetic, but ultimately, what these online spaces are essentially trading in is self-affirming, beneficial methods of healthy hobby indulgence. It's pretty clear that this, at least on the most basic level, is a decent outlet for the people who are seeking it, which means it works, more or less, as intended. At the very least, I don't think it's necessary for anyone to act overly cynical about these practices if they're benefiting others and not adversely affecting anyone. The idea I'd like to extend from this observation is a semantic exploration of the implications of such a system of performative superstition getting some degree of actual results as a functional method of hobbyist mindfulness. Firstly, even if this witchcraft is just window dressing on a vaguely New Age method of self-analysis and meditative grounding, if it does benefit the practitioner in some nebulous way, then hasn't a sort of non-material metaphysical magic happened? Let's lay out a hypothetical. You're about to attend a job interview and feel vastly underprepared. Regardless of how much you might actually have practiced for the interview and might be genuinely qualified to fill the position being hired for, you can't shake a persistent feeling that you aren't ready and you're bound to fail. If you happen to also be one of these self-styled magic users, perhaps you might stop and think on the problem for a moment before creating and performing a ritual of some sort. Let's say you write out the phrase, "I am prepared to succeed in this interview," or perhaps something a little bit more dramatic, on a piece of paper in vulgar Latin or Middle English or some other language you feel is suitably imposing for the job, and you burn the paper while staring into the flames. Then, having done this, you head off for your interview feeling infinitely more confident, and you ace all the questions asked of you, and you get the job. In this scenario, which is the sort of thing recounted all the time on the likes of these neo-witchcraft blogs, despite the act of your writing out the spell on paper and burning it having no actual capacity to physically affect you whatsoever, such a token move could still empower yourself to overcome the metaphysical mental barrier which was preventing you from measuring up to your ability. It's like inducing a sort of self-conscious placebo effect. But nevertheless, it would still be correct to say that the magic words changed the outcome. And of course, this job interview example is just one very specific made-up hypothetical. But the same effect could just as easily be derived to fulfill any similar need, using any other sort of performative ritual, like brewing a cup of tea or reciting a mantra, or repeatedly turning over a polished stone in one's hand. So long as the action were to be performed with the essential intent and the necessary placebo-inducing faith to engage with the believed concept by the person performing the action, or perhaps even having the action performed on their behalf by another individual. While the concept itself may be a little abstract to easily rationalize for someone who isn't particularly given to this line of performative wishful thinking, I think that even from a pragmatic perspective, there's not much value in trying to dismiss this sort of thing entirely if it's getting results. And if this stuff has meaningfully helped even one person ever, then I'd say that on the whole it's been worthwhile having these spaces online where it can be mutually explored and shared so easily. These sorts of online forums and their message boards, which propagate these semi-spiritual ideas, may have been made possible by the advent and rise of the internet, and it becoming more and more ubiquitous in daily life. But I think the concept of everything I've mentioned herein, in one form or another, is something which has actually been an element of most cultures' belief for a long time. It would be very easy to simply draw a connection between any of the new practices being discussed online and traditional religions, particularly those which involve active prayer, pilgrimages, totemic animism, ritual sacrifice, or anything similar, especially since many in the online space are deliberately and actively styling the terms they use to define their practices after a lot of ancient, broadly pagan customs. For the sake of illustrating my point even further, I think this sort of performative contemporary witchcraft even has analogues within mainstream Western Christian thought. Aspects of each are fulfilling the same role for the participant in providing a balming means of this metaphysical self-assurance and a social space with which to engage in it. Hymns are comparable to incantations. Prayers are spells. Eucharistic communion is another form of performative offering, and so on. You could suggest that something like a funeral or a wake is a ritualized rite by which people ameliorate their grief. The concepts I've touched on here are already being used as a means of existential affirmation by a very wide range of people in as many different ways, essentially. Even the people who most sincerely and genuinely believe in the capacity of this largely collaborative online neo-shamanism, I imagine they're only looking for some sense of grounding. Perhaps it's not perfect, but if it works for them, it's working enough. The whole magic system, at its most abstract level, is essentially a cure for the onset of cosmic nihilism through an esotericist lens, where one gets out as much as they put in. And just as I won't argue with affirmative results, I can't blame anyone for seeking an innovating hobby or an outlet either. In my book, the Tumblr witches are all right. Once again, my name's Card. Thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe to this YouTube page if you'd like to hear from me again. Goodbye for now, and have a lovely day.